but I will, if you can remember to bring me down the clicker when you introduce him, and then I'll click his slides. So let me switch to the...
Where's Preston? Oh, he's down towards the end.
Yes. Yeah, because you wanted to put these guys up front, you said,
right,
in case they have to leave.
Okay.
And, okay. Rotational.
Sit where? Maybe up there next to Maggie or, yeah, anywhere. Just not where the laptop is.
And how you like that bridge?
Where's Lee?
Oh, good question. I haven't seen it.
There you are. I was starting to get worried. How are you doing, dear? I know. You all will. Okay. You're good.
You're fine.
Yeah, sit, relax. Go get some coffee if you want.
No, it's okay now. I had to restart twice. How you like that bridge? You'll never guess where it is.
No, where is it?
Vietnam. Really? Yeah, north of Da Nang. They built that. They just opened it like last month.
That is really cool. We'll start in just 1 minute. We got a couple people coming in on the right side. Yeah. Testing. It's on. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first bridge meeting of the fiscal year. It's hard to believe that the next time we meet in December will be through Thanksgiving, through the midterm elections, and we'll all be behind on our shopping for the holidays. Just starting to sink in right now. So I'm not going to tell any jokes or talk any more than I have to this morning because, as you can see from the next slide, we have a really full agenda. We are going to try and get through all of this, and I've already told Jim, who's in line at the agenda, to talk about our website. If we have a few minutes at the end to show you some of the new improvements that we've made to our records management website, we will do that. If we run out of time, Jim has volunteered to come back in December and review those changes with all of you. So a couple introductory remarks. For those of you who are online, if you have a question during the program, please enter it into the chat box as you're watching the recording. Jim is sitting up front and is monitoring the chat for us. Also, when you do that, please let us know your name and the agency that you are writing from. And the same goes for everyone here in the room. If you have a comment or a question, we have microphones on the aisles. Please wait for the microphone and let us know who you are and where you're coming from. Later today, after the lunch break at 1 o'clock, we have our meet and greet with NARA staff in the Washington room upstairs on the mezzanine level. It is hosted by Appraisal Team 3, this bridge meeting. And there will also be representatives from the FRCP and other mission functions from NARA and staff to answer any questions you might have. So I think that covers it. I am going to dive right into the program and bring up Chris Pinkney, who is the Division Director of Operations out at WNRC, to talk about an update on what's going on out there in Suitland.
Magic clicker.
Magic clicker.
Magic clicker. See if I can figure this out. Oh, look at that. Oh, good morning. How was your September?
The answer is mine was not very good, and I think that's essentially what I'm here to talk to folks about today. If I can get this thing to work, look at that. But by the time I get off the stage, I want to have essentially accomplished three things. I want to give everybody the insider story as to what happened out at the WNRC. I want to kind of explain to you where we are right now and what type of situation we have in the building. And I want to tell you where we hope to be later in fiscal year 19, and I'll make that pretty short. So with that preamble, wow, what happened? A number of things happened. We ended up with what were essentially 5 separate issues that came to light over a period of weeks. The big one's the first one. We had an air handler that failed that fed the front office. That is the 500-pound gorilla in the corner, and that's what shut the center down. Once we discovered that, GSA subsequently discovered there were problems with our classified research room and preservation room in the back. There were some minor issues with offices off the upper and lower loading docks. And then later in the process, we have discovered we have some storm sewers, the big pipes that run through the building, which either have pinhole leaks or they've had condensation issues. And so we have a little bit of mold there. But the big story is the front office. And that is what has been so exciting. They say that a picture tells 1,000 words, and I don't know if the image quality is good enough on this to really make that a fact, but I've got 1,000 words to go with them too. The short version is, if there is a short version, GSA installed a new building automation system to handle the heat and humidity, the cooling, heating in our front office earlier this year. And that was really great for all of us because prior to that point, the WNRC offices, for people who've been out there, we had 2 settings. We had surface of the sun hot and we had Arctic blast. And so we noticed this spring that the temperature was much more moderate, it was much more pleasant, and we were actually quite enjoying it. Apparently what went wrong, and I don't have the exact date, is essentially a valve failed in the air handler that fed the front office units. The O&M contractors did not realize the valve had failed, and so as we moved into what has been a historically wet and humid summer, we started to see the humidity level rise in the front office. By maybe late July, it was getting kind of humid, and we were noticing it. You know, you don't expect to be sweating sitting at your desk. But we didn't think too much of it at the time. It just seemed, you know, that's situation normal. It's DC, it's the summer, it's supposed to be kind of hot. In mid-August is when we had our first big tickler that something was wrong. On the 17th of August, Ivan Johnson, who's our service branch chief for those who've worked with him, opened the closet in his suite, and he discovered that first picture, there was mold growing on all 4 walls in his closet. That's new. We see some weird things, but we hadn't seen that before. And so we took pictures, we reported it to GSA, and they said they would handle it. As we got to the end of August, first days of September, it was allergy season. I'm one of those people who takes Claritin and Sudafed every day, just on a general preventative type thing. But it was a rough fall, and unfortunately, it didn't occur to us it wasn't really fall yet. It was kind of summer still. So I was blaming my my allergies on leaves that hadn't really fallen off the trees. The next critical date is September 12th, when we had a NARA all-hands meeting. And I was teleworking that day, but Shannon Harris, one of my assistant directors, got all the staff together in the conference room. We got together, we watched the webinar, everybody had a good time. And as he was dismissing staff and pushed his chair back in, he suddenly realized that there was white stuff all over the back of the chair he'd been sitting in. And when he looked at it further, he realized that the white stuff was also on the arms of the chair. That looks like mold. So he called Krista Donnelly in, and they started looking at the conference room in detail. And they discovered that there was mold growth not only on our chairs, but it was creeping up the legs of furniture. It was obviously in the carpets. It was present on both the NARA flag and the US flag. And it was one of those things that you're like, this is a real problem. So they notified GSA. GSA came out and they shut the conference room. Then on the 13th of September, we were fortunate enough to be able to get a couple folks from NARA's preservation office who'd been coming out for another project to take a good look at the building. And so we spent about 2.5 hours walking around, and that's when we noticed mold growth in some of these other locations. If you popped the ceiling tiles, you realized that there was mold growing on the outside of the ductwork in the front offices. In areas where we didn't have a drop ceiling, there was mold growing on the concrete and on the pipes. And then we discovered it growing up furniture in several other areas. So it was clear there was a serious problem, and it wasn't going to be something that had an easy solution. So there were a series of consultations within NARA. We talked to our safety and life folks, and the decision was made to close the WNRC to NARA staff. We notified staff on the 13th of September, and the closure started on the 14th. We've learned a lot in the week since. While I'm not terribly happy with the chain of events that led us to the closure, I will give GSA credit for the work they've done since. They've had a ton of people in the building. They've had contractors working 14-hour shifts, and they've done a very impressive job of cleaning up the mess. At the end of the day, the culprit was determined to be, Aspergillus penicillium mold, which is great if you want to start a penicillin factory, as somebody in this audience suggested to me, but it's not so good if you're trying to run a federal office. And that's the little bugger we've been running into around the building. GSA has done lots of demolition. They have torn out all the carpets in any area that was impacted. They've had to take out some walls, which they have replaced. As this progressed, we discovered that it had grown up behind the soundproofing we had in our office areas. We had the old fabric soundproofing, and when you pulled it off, there was mold growing behind that. It's pretty gross. We've lost all of our furniture, essentially. They discovered it was growing in our cubicle walls. It was in the fabric of our chairs. Eventually, we discovered that it was even growing up in a lot of our desks, because some of it was the press board, and so it had grown up inside, and it wasn't immediately apparent, but when you turned it over, it was pretty bad. And finally, we lost all of our bookshelves, all of our cabinets and things like that. So if you've been out to WNRC and you've seen the wooden shelves with all the agency schedules and all that good stuff, we've got the schedules, but we don't have the bookcases anymore. About the only thing that came through in a lot of our spaces was metal furniture. So if it was all metal, it did a pretty good job of holding up to the cleaning process. When they did the immediate cleaning, the first thing they did is they did a lot of fogging. And I am not a scientist. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I don't understand all the science. But in essence, they were spraying a substance that essentially encapsulates the mold spores. And the theory is it tightens down as it dries, and it renders the surface less vulnerable to mold infestations in the future. So they have fogged all the offices again and again, and they have continued to do that until late last week. They also brought in a bunch of big commercial air scrubbers with 3 separate types of filters, and they're using that to scrub the air in the impacted areas. And they've done a really nice job of installing beautiful new carpets. They patched all the holes in the walls. They've repainted, they primed, they cleaned. They went pretty much above and beyond with the restoration. I can say very honestly the place looks better than it has since I came up in 2011, and I strongly suspect at the end of the day it'll look better than it has since maybe 1972, 73. NARA has essentially taken Ronald Reagan's approach to this whole thing. If you guys remember Reykjavik and Trust But Verify. As GSA has told us that an area has been remediated, NARA has paid to bring in independent certified industrial hygienists who are doing testing in each area. They're doing visual inspections, they're doing spore counts, and they're doing cultures in a lot of the areas. And then we essentially are getting a thumbs up or a thumbs down from them. So if it's all remediated, the area is clear for NARA staff. If they come back with additional suggestions, we pass them to GSA, and we keep Nartians out of the area until it's completely clear. Where we are now. Right now, we have access to most but not all of the building. We have all 20 stacks, and we have the upper and lower loading dock offices. We brought staff back in on the 3rd of October. We've set up temporary workstations. We've set up temporary IT. We still don't have a lot of our phones, so if people are trying to call, you may get a lot of disconnected lines or busy signals. They're struggling to punch out phone lines and match them up in the back of the building. Again, there's apparently a distinction in the building from front office phones and back area phones. In theory, GSA has now finished the remediation activities in the front office. And so tomorrow morning I will be wearing jeans and sneakers and walking around with industrial hygienists as we're going to test all the front office spaces. We'll get results, I doubt we'll get them Friday, maybe Monday or Tuesday of next week. And if they're all positive, we'll start the process of moving back into the front spaces at WNRC. They're not done. Once we get the all clear for the front office, they'll be able to turn the rest of their attention to the classified research room. And the issue back there relates to another failed air handler, which was unique to the space. The bottom rusted out earlier this year, dropped a bunch of water. GSA thought they had vacuumed everything up, and they made an honest effort to do so, but apparently they missed just enough that it did get up into the walls. And so they've had to demo that whole area, and they can't finish the rebuild until they install a new air handler. So that is being manufactured for us. And then once they are done with that, they've got to get a bigger commercial fogger, and they've got to get some good lifts so they can get guys up to work on those storm sewer pipes. They're heavy, the insulation has to come off, and they want to fog the areas and make sure they can safely work there. So that is all in our future. I brought a few more pics because if you're familiar with the facility, the one in the upper corner is the research room, or excuse me, is the conference room. I guess we could make it whatever we want it to be now. But like I said, you can see we lost all of our furnishings. When we come back in, hopefully next week, that's what we're coming back to. So we have very nice carpet, we have shiny walls, we have lights that are very good, and that's pretty much it. The lower pick is the research room up front. We were able to salvage the metal lockers, but everything else is gone. And then that is our T&D suite. So if you've had any interaction with our T&D folks over the last 5 weeks, they have not had access to the cabinets where we store 135s. They've really been working without most of their tools. And the final pick is just an air filter. Those are the things that are running in the building. My understanding is that 3 are rented, 3 are purchased, and they'll stay with us to make sure the air stays really good. The hope is sometime in November we have access to the whole building and we can actually resume something that looks like regular operations. Some of this is dependent on how quickly things can be manufactured. The air handling unit for the back has to be built. We will be working on folding tables and cool little chairs for the next 6 to 8 months. David Weinberg is working with CRTKL and our business support folks to get us swank new furniture. The building will ultimately look very, very nice and staff are excited. But to get to that point, we have to go through the design, we have to go through the manufacturing, and then we have to do installation. I wanted to highlight the fact for everybody that works with us that when we move back to the front office, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 days where it's really tough to get in touch with us. We've probably got 150, 200 boxes of stuff that has to be unpacked. A lot of it was packed quickly. It's a mix of administrative records and stuff off people's desks. And I don't want to get in the business of going through people's personal stuff too fast and accidentally throwing away something that has value to an individual. So it will take us a little while to get situated, and then hopefully while we're doing the unpacking, the IT guys and the phone lines can all be sorted out too. And then finally, at the moment, both research rooms are closed. The unclassified room is closed upstairs. That's the one that's more likely to reopen relatively quickly. If anybody likes to sit Indian style on the floor, we could probably have you in pretty quick. But we're going to try to find a way to get some folding tables and temp chairs up there. Reopening the classified research room will take longer because, again, there's more construction that has to be done. But if you've ever worked in that space, previously it was pretty depressing. The paint color could have been better. The walls, not so good. And it looks really, really nice now. So And then finally, I had to take a picture of Ebony Tate. If you work with T&D, you may know her. That gives you an idea of what our workstations look like right now. That's the back of the building, and our T&D crew is split between about 3 offices. It was wherever we happened to have drops at the time. But they are there, they are trying to work, and they will try to get caught up as rapidly as they can. So, any questions I can answer? Other than, don't let this happen to you.
Online.
Yeah.
Sammy from MCC.
Hey.
Are they testing you guys for being exposed to that stuff?
Well, what we've essentially recommended to all the staff that they fill out a CA2 and just document the exposure. I personally have asthma, and I spent a lot of time in the building because even when it was closed to staff, a couple of us were on site. My understanding, and again, I'm not a scientist, is that the type of mold is not as bad as it could have been. It's the stuff that makes me cough, not the part that normally kills me. But we do want to make sure that staff have documented the exposure in case they have future issues. The hope is we're all fine. We all seem fine right now. But if somebody does have long-term sensitivity that develops after 20 or 30 years, we'll be able to say it was documented. So, any other questions? Are we good?
This is Susan from the OCC,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I just wanted to thank you because we had just started a project right when this happened to recall hundreds and hundreds of boxes that we needed to sort through, and we had brought on detailees to do the work, and so we were, definitely frustrated with the delay in getting them, and wanted to thank you for getting back up to speed quickly. So I wanted to thank you and your team for that, and then just ask you if you know how big your backlogs are now.
The reference backlog it's pretty small at this point. I won't say we're completely current, but we're pretty close to that. My biggest concern is that because the facility was closed, we had to cancel a large number of pickups of customer records and a lot of our deliveries. And so I'm concerned that offices around DC may be packed with boxes right now. We're trying to get people on our truck schedule as rapidly as we can. But I think that's actually my biggest concern. It's not what I see in the building right now. It's what I know people were trying to ship to us, but they haven't been able to get to us. I will give out my number because we have so few lines working right now. But if you have a major project or something, my phone works. I'm very proud. It's 301-778-1511. And I'll try to either answer the question or I'll try to get you in touch with somebody who can help you. So.
Hey, Chris.
Yes, sir.
We have a question from online. What was the impact on the warehouse? Where agency? There we go.
Wow.
What was the impact on the warehouse where agency records are stored?
Well, this is the amazing part. We've traditionally tried to have water leaks and other weird events that seem to impact our storage areas, our main corridors. They came through remarkably well. The air handlers that failed were unique to the office spaces. So the one that had the bottom rust out in the back just handled the classified research room and our preservation rooms, and the one that failed on the front with the valve handled just the front offices. The only impact we've had on the stack areas, like I said, there's some isolated sections of storm sewer pipe. Compared to everything else we've dealt with, this is very minimal, and we believe there's no impact at all on customer records. So we got lucky.
And when do you think you'll be accepting transfers again?
We are in business now. If somebody has transfers, we'll take them. Like I said, we're backed up with our truck service. But if you have material to ship in, both our loading docks are operational. If you're having issues with getting the 135 or something approved, please get in touch with me, and we'll try to make sure we get that set so you can send in your records. But we are open for business. Anything else? Good enough? Well, thank you all. It's very nice to be here.
Thanks, Chris. So I'd like to introduce our next 2 speakers. Periodically, we'd like to provide some updates from other parts of agency services. So we'll hear an update next from Mark Bradley from the Information Security Oversight Office, followed by Alina Simo, who's the Director of the Office of Government Information Services. Mark?
Click with your
go anywhere. Let me make sure. Stop button. Right button. Right button. There you go. Morning, y'all. Thanks for coming. Before I start, I want to tell you the genesis of what I'm about to say. Two events really shaped what I'm about to show you. 1988, I was a young CIA officer stationed on the Pak-Afghan border, my first overseas assignment. At that time, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and President Reagan was determined to give the Soviets their Vietnam. So we were running a lot of guns, a lot of weapons through Pakistan into Afghanistan. My job was to report back on the stability of the Pakistani government to make sure that it was going to be there as our allies. We kept doing what we were doing. First assignment I got was to write a report about what was going on with the government of Pakistan. So being a diligent young analyst, I sat down and wrote a 5,000-page, not a 5,000 word page report on what was going on. I took it to the chief of station, and he looked at it, and he did this. He said, "That's what you get. You get no more than that." This is long before the days of EVS, when they worried about how I felt about that. He said, "Take it back, redo it." He said, "Nobody in Washington has time to read that kind of report. Nobody cares about that kind of report. And they sure as hell don't at the CIA back at Langley, and you'll never get it to the White House because they won't let it in the front door. I mean, they like 2 sentences. And you got to remember, that's not disparaging the White House. I mean, it's a very busy place. In those days, we had operations going on, what later became Iran-Contra, of course, which I know nothing about, and I was in a different part of the world. We had Angola, where the Cubans were very active down there. So the White House was very busy also, too, with Gorbachev coming in, where the CIA was trying to figure out what he was going to do. So anyway, I learned a very valuable lesson that if one wanted to reach senior policymakers, one had to be very concise and very brief. So as hurt as my feelings were to see my brilliant work not be read, I was able to boil it down to 1 page, and that lesson stuck with me. Fast forward 10 years after that, I had the best job I ever had in the government. I was Daniel Patrick Moynihan's legislative director. And Pat Moynihan was one of the last public intellectuals, I think, that we've had in this country, unfortunately. And Pat was of the mind that the government could do great things if it had 2 things: if it had data, and if that data were accurate. And also, too, I mean, if that data were properly analyzed, that the government could actually do what it was designed to do, which was to serve the American people. Again, Moynihan came out of the Great Depression. He was a big believer in the strength and the power of the American government to do good. But he said it's got to have the right type of information to do it. So anyway, with those 2 lessons in mind, I came over to ISOO in 2018. And our most important product is something called the Annual Report to the President of the United States. And what that report is it tells the President about the health of the nation's classification and declassification systems. We here at ISOO have oversight over the entire federal government's classification and declassification programs. I have a staff right now of about 24 people. Right? So you ask yourself, how can one do that, right? The answer is not very easily. Right? But what I do have is I have the power of the reporting to the President. So anyway, when I got here, I read our annual report. And the first question I asked was, is who reading it? The answer was, not many. And certainly not the President of the United States, nor even the National Security Advisor. So I thought to myself, okay, wait a minute. What good is our doing a report if it's not being read? Right? I mean, it's the one tool I've got. It's the one thing I have that can raise red flags, that can make recommendations, that can point things out to the President that he may not know. And let's face it, declassification and classification is important, but is that as sexy as Saudi Arabia? Right? Is it as sexy as dealing with Vladimir Putin? Is it as sexy as dealing with the Chinese? The answer is no. So I've got a limited shot to get in front of the President. I've got a limited shot to be able to keep his attention. Right? So I had to revamp the way we did the annual report. I'm happy to say that for the first time in decades, our report was actually read by National Security Advisor John Bolton. First time. and been read by a national security advisor in a very, very long time. Why was that? I think it was, we made it much more like a CIA assessment. CIA assessments, how many of you have any familiar with those at all? Yeah, okay, yeah, of course you do. They actually go out on the limb a bit. They make key judgments, they make key recommendations. They're bold, they're innovative, and they're not for the faint of heart. A lot of them are wrong, right? It's risky sometimes to do that. It's a lot safer not to say much at all and just let the data speak for itself. Our problem is that we had so much data that it was difficult to make sense out of it. So what we decided to do was to make the report much more targeted, slim it down, and again, try to focus on exactly what it is. If I was standing in front of the president and had a minute just tell him about this, that this is what this would be the main kernels of what I would want him to know. Again, you know, things have gotten even worse now, I think, in terms of attention spans. And if you think about it, how many demands are on our own time with you know, all the electronic media that we have now, all the records that are coming our way? Can you imagine being a policymaker and trying to decide what even to read on a given day? I mean, the millions of emails that stream into the National Security Council and the White House during a week. So anyway, the job of trying to gain attention has gotten even more difficult. It's gotten even more challenging than it was. And so, you know, I am a big believer in the shortest reports one can write, the most concise one can say, and the most accurate one can be. That's the whole point of trying to do, I think, a report that's going to be read in the government. What we did is, the most important thing, I think, is to actually try to lead the reader to what I want him or her to read, right? Not let them read the report and try to find things. I wanted to spell it out for them. I wanted to be able to give, and the report starts with one page, key judgments and recommendations. So if they got nothing else out of the thing, they could rip out the first page and take it and have the whole report distilled down to this. So you could read this in less than 30 seconds, right, and digest it within less than a minute. Because again, the competition is ferocious in trying to get the attention of top policymakers. It is unbelievably competitive. So anyway, that's what we started with. These were our key recommendations this time around. I believe, as the director of ISOO, that we're soon facing a crisis point. If nothing else, what 9/11 brought us was just a deluge of information. The intelligence community has exploded over time. In fact, you know, we didn't have a DNI before 9/11. Didn't have a Department of Homeland Security before 9/11. Didn't have any of that stuff. So what we have now is we have more records, more data coming our way than we've ever had before. The problem is we're a democracy too, right? So how do we get this data out to our people? How do we inform the American people about what their government is doing, right? It's a constant balance. Yet how do we protect ourselves from some very serious enemies that we have? One answer is technology. Basically, what I found is that it's the Wild West out there. Some agencies are moving rapidly ahead with technology and classification, declassification. Others are frankly still lodged in the 1990s. ISOO's job is to bring attention to this for the entire federal government. I'm not an advocate just for the 17 members of the U.S. intelligence community. I'm an advocate for the Department of Commerce. I'm an advocate for the Department of Treasury, too. I'm at the Department of the Social Security Administration. Things have nothing to do with the CIA or the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. But we need a nationwide technological program to be able to address this issue. Otherwise, we're going to choke to death on the data. We'll never get it on the shelves. We'll never get it declassified. We'll never even see it. We'll never even find it, right? The middle, I think, is extremely important. Budget line. Yeah. As you know, almost all this comes out of our own hides of an agency. There is no separate line item budget for classification, declassification, right? What does that mean? It usually means it slips to the bottom of the queue, right? It's the last in line. I can't tell you how many arguments I've had over the years with people saying, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to hunt terrorists or do you want me to declassify documents, right? As if it was some type of zero-sum game. Not realizing, I think that's probably one good thing that came out of the Edward Snowden disclosures is that agencies realize now that it's probably better to get things out earlier than later and try to keep the American people somewhat informed about what's going on instead of having come out that kind of way. So I think you're beginning to see agencies themselves incorporate release more in their operational agenda. Nevertheless, it's still a huge cultural shift, and it would help if it could be plussed up with a line item in each agency's budget that X dollars is allocated to declassification, right? Now, another recommendation we made is to make automatic declassification actually automatic. Who here knows what the release rate is for automatic declassification? 55%, right? What's automatic about that? All right? Bit of a disconnect, isn't it? Reason it went into the original executive order, it actually goes back to the Clinton year, 12958. The reason it's still here is it's a stick to make the agencies actually do something. But now we're 10 years, almost 20 years past that. And so we need to make automatic declassification actually mean what it says. Once a document ages out, in my view, the National Declassification Center, somebody ought to have the power to say, you know what, that's it, it's gone, right? It has to be declassified. Otherwise, we can't keep track of what we've got. It becomes even a counterintelligence or security issue. The more we hold back, the more we have to protect, the more expensive it becomes. Do we really need to withhold it all? The answer is no, right? You just got to have the courage to be able to do it. So anyway, one again. One of the things about writing an annual report like this, though, is that it also makes one look internally about one's own failings, about one's own self-improvements that can be made. And guess what? We found out that a lot of our data were not accurate. We had been reporting things that were, I wouldn't say not true. It's just that we were just accepting what the agencies were telling us. For instance, you know, they'll tell you as a collective that the United States government spends about $16 billion a year on classifying and declassifying national security information. When you ask them how they got at that figure, nobody can really tell you. What does it mean? Does that mean when you're securing the information, the guard at the gate, does that cover his salary, his uniform, his gun? Is it the cost of the computer running? Is it the cost of the safes? They can't tell you at all. It's not a fictitious figure. I think it's a ballpark figure. I think 16 billion is probably out there somewhere in the probably middle outfield, maybe, right? Depending on whether it's Fenway Park or Tiger Stadium. I mean, depending on how you want to measure this stuff. But again, you know, I'm supposed to be reporting to the President of the United States, right? And if I got called before Congress and said, Bradley, the $16 billion, how'd you get that? I'd have a very difficult time. Well, sir, I just took what they gave me. I don't think that's a very acceptable answer. So anyway, we are beginning to question some of our own figures, some of our own reporting methods, some of our own ways of going about things. The good news is that the agencies are up for this as well because they too need to have a better figure, a better idea of how much money they're spending on all this stuff. It helps them. And if we ever do move to being able to actually ask Congress for separate line item money on this, Congress likes what? It likes exactitude. I mean, you just can't make up a number and say, I need $10 billion for this. No, they're going to have a hearing on that, and they're going to ask you why you need that kind of money. So anyway, this has been helpful in the sense of introspection. I mean, to making us actually look at some of our own functions. It's also, too, as you know, the Interagency Security Classification Appeals Panel sits in this building. I'm the executive secretary of it. It's probably the government's, well, in fact, it is. It's the government's foremost appeals board on security classification decisions. It's the Supreme Court, if you will, of this kind of world. It can only be overturned by the President of the United States. And one of the things that we're looking at now is doing a much better job prioritizing requests, trying to make sure that we're getting the records out that have the highest public value, that have the highest public interest. Again, for the first time in a long time, we're going to look at some of our own internal processes. Again, being driven by actually thinking about this. This is a system that for a very long time has been, lack of a better way to say it, kind of on autopilot. And this is really, the annual report is making us question again not only our own methodologies but also those of other agencies. So I think it's a very healthy thing to go through. It can be somewhat painful, but necessary. One of the things that we did in the report that was the most controversial, but also one of the most successful, was I put a chart in there this time that called out agencies. That's not usually a smart thing to do in Washington. Luckily, I'm close enough to retirement that if something happened, I'd be all right. But anyway, we've had a lot of trouble getting our Controlled Unclassified Information program up. The ISOO is the executive agent. In fact, I am the executive agent of that program. It's been in 3 administrations now. Started with George W. Bush, went through the Obama administration, and now it's with the Trump. I think many hoped the Trump administration would kill it. Guess what? That's not happened. So we have it. And so anyway, what I decided to do is I was tired, actually frustrated, of seeing the program kind of go sideways. And so what I did is, in the annual report to the President, I said, Mr. President, you have an executive order, you have a federal rule, you've got a lot of agencies who aren't abiding it, aren't following, in my view, the law. We can't have this. And so we did. We put a chart out that had color-coded about the various progress. I can say since then, the progress has speeded up about 100%. No one likes to be called out to the President, and no one likes to be called out, especially when the National Security Advisor reads the report and says, you know what, I expect the rule of law to be followed. So again, the report can have a dramatic effect. And again, I mean, I'm not a particularly brave person, but I do get frustrated with things when they don't move. And so I think it was the right thing to do, and we're going to keep the chart in there as kind of a way to show the progress on the program. I don't know what other vehicle I frankly have that has such a high profile. But the program, again, just over the last couple months has made dramatic gains. Agencies who hadn't even done the basic first steps have now done 2 or 3 different things now. So it paid off this time. And so we will continue that effort. As I said before, we're going to continue reforming the reforms. I want to make the report as slim as I can. Again, I want it to be read. It does me no good for my own ego to write something that's not going to be read. We're overhauling some of our own internal forms. What I don't want to be, I want to get the information I need. I don't want information I don't need. It's of no use to me, and I don't want to waste the agency's time gathering it, right? It's too expensive. They've got better things to do than be chasing down figures that are no use to me. What I need to be able to tell the President of the United States is, sir, your program is healthy or not healthy. It's like an annual physical, if you will, right? When you go in for your physical, you know, you do all the tests and all that. I mean, some doctors go over each part of it. Mine doesn't. He just sends you, you're okay, right? Okay, which is all I need to know, right? So anyway, as we go through this, you know, luckily 13526 executive order that governs this report gives me a lot of latitude about what I want to send to the White House. I could send a postcard to the White House if I wanted to, right? I need a little more than that. But it may one day come down to a fulsome letter. I don't know. It just depends. You know, what I think will get read. And obviously, I don't do this in a vacuum. I'm coordinating with the National Security Council. I take my policy guidance from them. I obviously talk to all the agencies to see exactly, you know, what exactly would help them the most. Because, again, the point of this program is ultimately to do what? It's just to make sure that the United States is protected and secure, but also make sure that the American people have confidence in their governments. Otherwise, the report's not worth the paper it's printed on. My time's being wasted. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do as a civil servant. So hopefully, you know, this will continue, and it'll keep evolving. It's 2018 now. The world has changed dramatically since 2015, since 2005, certainly from the 90s. And we need to try to keep track with this stuff because I know you all as records officers have some of the same problems that we've got. You're getting choked to death. You're being drowned by records and information. And the question is, how do we get a handle on this? How do we try to manage it? how do we try to make some sense out of it? And this is one step, that we need to raise the profile of what we're doing. Otherwise, we don't get the resources we need, we don't get the attention we need, we don't get the backing we need. So no matter how dedicated you are, no matter how much you believe in what you're doing, you need to have the tools, the resources, and the backing to be able to get your jobs done. So this report is a tool to be able to help you, you do that. I think that's the last slide, Lawrence. I'm not sure. Let me see. Yeah. Any questions?
It's Sammy from MCC again. How you doing?
Yeah.
So it generally sounds like a couple of scenarios we've been going through for the past 5 years: money, time, and personnel.
Yep.
I've personally read about 5 different working group documents that's been going forward. A lot of these programs sit within a records management program that's already minimum staff,
Right.
part-time staff,
Yep.
and no budget line. And it's been 2 major documents that came out that says agencies should have a budget. Like everybody in this room, we can't force our agencies to do anything about getting an extra budget when it should come down directly from the authority saying, here's your budget.
Right.
So it's the same conversation
It is.
that you're giving back to us about we should have a budget when we should be given a budget.
That's right. This is the first time, though, the National Security Advisor has been told that. So all we can do, and I feel you're paying, I'm in the same boat. I could use more money, too.
But I'm saying, one of your questions was how can we do it better?
Yeah.
So just like we got everybody in this room in here,
Yeah.
who in here is actually the CUO, the CUI program manager?
Yeah, a couple.
Now, who's the records manager?
Yeah, right, but no.
Whenever we have these types of events, is have those people in the room so we can come on a united front.
That's right.
So the voices come stronger.
That's right. No, your points are very well taken and very artfully said, and I can't disagree with a thing you said. We are fighting a very tough fight here. I mean, again, as I said before, when you go out to the agencies, again, the argument is, what do you want me to spend my money on? You want me to hunt down X, or do you want me to declassify Y? And again, there's this bizarre zero-sum game mentality about this stuff. We can do both. I mean, we just need to be smarter about this. And you know, I'm not Don Quixote, but sometimes I feel like him. You know, I mean, you're charging these windmills out here. But the best we can do is just keep trying to get this on the radar. At some point, somebody's going to listen. I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, you know, John Bolton, he's Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Yale, went to Yale Law School. I mean, he's well educated. I mean, he understands, you know, some of this stuff, and he does ask questions. So I mean, you know, one takes one's friends when one can get them, and so we are you know, avidly trying to keep this thing alive, especially with technology. We are in the midst now of beginning to have some very serious discussions about rewriting 13526, the President's executive order that governs this. And one of the things that the previous executive orders have not done is draw attention to the resource problem. In my view, the orders are not worthless without the resources, but they are very anemic without them. We've got to think about resources. We've got to turn our attention to money. I'm sorry, that's just what's going to make these things work. Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alina Simo. I am the director of the Office of Government Information Services, the FOIA Ombudsman, and I've been the director since December of 2016. This is the second time Lawrence has asked me to come and speak and follow Mark, which is very tough. He's a very tough act to follow, but I will do my best. I would like to cover a few issues today. First, I want to give you a brief update on the FOIA landscape, both at the administrative stage and in litigation, and how our workload has been affected. I would like to briefly tell you about the work of the FOIA Advisory Committee, and I will end by raising 4 big challenges to the implementation of FOIA that we are facing and that we have to deal with. So Congress clearly intended a distinct role for OGIS by choosing to establish us within the National Archives. One of NARA's strategic goals is to make access happen, making the agency a natural home for our office. And Congress has given us two clear missions. One, to provide mediation services to help resolve FOIA disputes between requesters and federal agencies. And two, to review agencies' FOIA policies, procedures, and compliance, and identify procedures and methods for improving FOIA compliance. The FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 reaffirmed a very critical role that OGIS plays in the FOIA process at any point in the administrative continuum. This graph is intended to show that our workload has really gone up, especially after the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 came into being, and our workload has continued to increase. We've had a couple of slight downturns, but essentially we experienced a 150% increase in requests for assistance immediately following the FOIA Improvement Act, and we continue to grow. The fact that our workload has continued to increase, though, is no doubt a reflection of the general FOIA landscape. So let me set the stage for some of these statistics. There are approximately 117 federal agencies that are subject to FOIA. During fiscal year 2017, the last available data, there were 4,506.36 employees working on FOIA full-time. I love the .36. The total costs of all FOIA-related activities across the government was over $520 million. Over 92% of that was spent on FOIA requests and appeals, only 8% spent on litigation. In fiscal year 2017, agencies collected close to $3 million in FOIA fees, just a drop in the bucket, because those fees actually amounted to less than 1% of the total cost of the government's FOIA activities. And between fiscal year 2010 and 2017, there was a 37% increase in the number of FOIA requests. And although you can see agencies have been trying to keep up and have processed an equal number of requests, backlogs at agencies continue to rise. In the same years, 2010 to 2017, the overall backlog of pending FOIA requests increased by 60%. So based on the number of FOIA requests being filed, it's probably not a surprise that the number of FOIA lawsuits have also been rising. Lawsuits have risen sharply in the last several years. Between fiscal year 2012 and 2018, they rose an astonishing 120%. Court backlogs of pending FOIA litigation have climbed even faster, with hundreds of cases awaiting resolution. Indeed, the backlog is already approaching 900 cases and will likely go over 1,000 in the near future. As in the past, the largest number of OGIS cases during fiscal year 2018, we just fresh off the press here is our graph that reflects that we have the most business with my former agency and Mark's former agency, the Department of Justice, particularly law enforcement components such as the FBI, Bureau of Prisons, U.S. Marshal Service, as well as the Executive Office for United States Attorneys. DOJ's cases were followed by Department of Homeland Security, Social Security Administration, and the Department of Defense. As the FOIA Ombudsman, OGIS works to improve the FOIA process in a variety of ways, but I'm going to focus on two particular areas today, because I don't have that much time. One of those ways is our participation in the Records Management Self-Assessment, the RMSA. Everyone knows about that, right? OGIS's ability to ask several questions as part of the RMSA has provided us with significant and unique insights regarding the FOIA across the entire federal government. So we thank Lawrence for letting us participate. He thought we were only doing it 1 year, but we keep coming back. We are very grateful to each and every one of your participation in the RMSA, and while we realize that participation has at times been a little bit challenging, we very much value your collaboration with the FOIA folks in your agencies to provide thorough and accurate responses. The second area I want to cover is our involvement with the FOIA Advisory Committee, which also allows us to address challenges to the implementation of FOIA and improve administration. I chair the FOIA Advisory Committee, and OGIS staff provides administrative support. The committee is chartered by the National Archives to provide recommendations to improve the administration of FOIA to the Archivist of the United States. The committee brings together members of the FOIA community from inside and outside of government to identify the greatest challenges to the administration of FOIA and develop collaborative solutions. Thus far, the committee has made a total of 8 recommendations to the archivist and has advanced over 35 best practices. These cover a broad range of topics, including the need for updated fee guidance, improving FOIA search technology and the accessibility of records released under FOIA for people with disabilities, and expanding the use of FOIA performance standards. The committee's first 2 reports are available on our website. I am excited to report that last month we kicked off the 3rd term of the FOIA Advisory Committee right here in McGowan. We had a lively meeting. If you missed it, you can watch it on YouTube. There was lots of brainstorming and participation from the committee members, and it resulted in the creation of 3 subcommittees. You will all be pleased to know that one of the 3 subcommittees is going to focus exclusively on records management issues as they relate to FOIA. The other 2 subcommittees are Vision, which will focus on the future of FOIA, and Time Volume, which will focus on the growing volume of FOIA requests and the increased amount of time it is taking agencies to respond to that growing volume of FOIA requests. Subcommittees have already begun to hold meetings and discuss their plans going forward, and you are all invited to attend our next meeting right here in McGowan Theater on Thursday, November 29th. I would like to focus my remaining few minutes on 4 challenges that highlight the intersection of FOIA and records management, and that will probably resonate with many of you here today. The first challenge I would like to address is the importance of making records accessible even when they are not created or stored in ways that make them particularly easy to find or release in response to FOIA requests. When agency employees are making decisions about how to create, receive, and store information, it is natural that their first concern is fulfilling their agency's mission. At the National Archives, access to records is a core part of our mission. But the FOIA offices at most other agencies are not so lucky. Records are created and stored in ways that sometimes make it difficult and inefficient for FOIA professionals to A, find those records in response to FOIA requests, and B, release those records to FOIA requesters. And we can't stress this enough, records management is critical to an effective FOIA process. No records management, no access. Spending some time about thinking how a record can be released at the beginning of the information lifecycle can save an agency scarce resources later in the FOIA release process. In order to truly address this issue, as the FOIA Advisory Committee has recognized, agencies will need to adopt a holistic approach to the lifecycle of information management, and one that takes FOIA into account. The second challenge to implementation I would like to raise is the wide variety in the types of records and resources that each agency holds. In our FOIA compliance work at OGIS, we recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for managing a FOIA program. Agencies have to set up their processes to account for a variety of factors, including the sensitivity of the records and the agency's IT infrastructure. What works well at the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, it used to be CFPB, now they've changed, a new agency with largely electronic records may not work at the U.S. Postal Service, an agency that was built to sustain the exchange of paper between people. A good example of the kinds of issues that must be dealt with on a case-by-case basis is the decision to set up a centralized or a decentralized FOIA process. By centralized, I mean a system where the agency's FOIA resources are generally concentrated in one office. A decentralized system means that FOIA resources are spread throughout the agency. While addressing ways to make agency FOIA operations run efficiently, the FOIA Advisory Committee has recommended that a best practice is to centralize, but where appropriate. The committee's April 2018 final report and recommendations clearly explains the benefits of centralization. It decreases the amount of time coordinating between offices, makes FOIA training more efficient, and it makes it easier for agencies to deal with a surge in requests or a backlog at a particular office. Despite those benefits, centralization is not always the best choice. At an agency that has highly technical or sensitive documents, a FOIA processor in a centralized office may not know enough detail about the program to make appropriate release decisions. And at an agency where documents are largely paper and dispersed throughout the country, centralization would create inefficiencies in the process. The third challenge to effective implementation of the FOIA is the challenge of recruiting and keeping talented people in FOIA. This is one area I actually feel very strongly about. This is particularly challenged in the federal government, especially lately, where there has been a perception that the FOIA office is where employees are assigned as a form of punishment. But FOIA has always been a four-letter word, right? After several years of advocacy by the organizations such as the American Society of Access Professionals, ASAP, OPM issued a job series which has recognized FOIA as a professional career and provides a career ladder for people who want to devote their work lives to providing the public with access to agency records. The professionalized job series is a good start, it's a GIS, but more needs to be done. In particular, we need to look for ways to identify young talent and bring them into the career path. In the FOIA Advisory Committee's final report that we issued earlier this year, we identified a number of best practices related to bringing in talent. In particular, the committee noted that agencies have had success by creating rotational programs to expose inexperienced or entry-level employees to FOIA and building a new career model for information governance, which helps bring in employees who understand the life cycle of information and support records management, FOIA, and privacy. The report also discusses how agencies can best use interns, employees on temporary assignment from other agencies, and contractors to support the FOIA program and identify talent. The fourth and final challenge I would like to address today is the ever-growing volume of electronic records. As agencies create more records, it means that FOIA offices will have to search through more records to find what is responsive and review and process more records. Technology can help us address this issue, but it is not a silver bullet. Unfortunately, the keyword searches that many agencies are using to find electronic records return a large amount of material that could or could not be responsive to a FOIA request. And ultimately, after it is reviewed, it's sometimes not even related to the topic that has been requested. There are powerful e-discovery tools that provide much better search capabilities and that can help streamline the review of records, but they are expensive and not within the budget of many or most FOIA offices, particularly for offices that do not receive a large volume of requests every year. None of these four challenges that I've just discussed have a magic bullet solution, but they are important discussion topics that have been and will continue to be an integral part of the work of the FOIA Advisory Committee and an important part of OGIS's continuing mission to improve the FOIA process. I invite you to visit our website, subscribe to our blog, and follow us on Twitter. We need as many followers as we can get. Thank you very much. Any questions? Hello.
Hi, I'm Greg Carroll at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, one of those DOJ law enforcement
Yes.
components. You had lots of statistics there on FOIA requests. The government is typically miserable at responding. Do we have any statistics on that, on responses and completions of FOIA requests?
So I invite you to look at the Department of Justice FOIA reporting that they post. The Office of Information Policy posts all the annual reports from the FOIA officers and the chief FOIA officer reports, and they have those statistics. The new stats are probably not going to come out until spring, early spring of next year. So I don't have anything off the top of my head immediately. But I will say overall the trends that we're seeing are that the backlogs are growing and the delays are growing for complex requests. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next up on the agenda, we're very happy to have an update on the developmental work, the ongoing developmental work related to the Electronic Records Archives, the ERA. And we're happy to have David Lake join us today to give us the update. He is the ERA program manager. Unfortunately, his partner in crime, Sam McClure, who is the Electronic Records program director at NARA, was unable to join us today. So David is going to step up and cover Sam's talking points as well. So, David?
Good morning, everyone. So I know Sam entertained all of you back in June. So if you came here specifically to hear the comedy stylings of Sam McClure, I'm sorry. But we will get through here. The agenda for today is, apparently I don't have one. There we go. So we're going to go through the current status of ERA 2.0 as it stands today. Very relevant, I think, to folks of you in the room who know and love the ERA-based system that you use. We're going to give you an update on the redesign of that, the scheduling and transfer processes, capabilities that we're going to be putting into ERA 2.0 that just kicked off, and also the next steps as we know it at this point. So actually, ERA 2.0 just went live a few weeks ago. We have a 3-week newborn. She's thriving, happy, healthy. She sleeps at night. She's actually doing very well. We're excited about what has happened with the launch of that. This has been about a 4-year effort. We went through a 3-year pilot effort. Last year, we spent getting ERA 2.0 ready for production and successfully got to that point at the end of September and just launched a few weeks ago. So this is, at this point, ERA 2.0 is mainly inward focused right now to address some of the ingest and processing capabilities, limitations that we've had over the years with the ERA-based system, which was launched way back in 2008. So at this point, what we've rolled out is a processing environment and a repository now in a new cloud environment for our users. This allows NARA staff to upload and process digital files. So that can be born digital from agencies as well as some of the digitizing products that we create at NARA. As I said, we're in the early weeks of first use by some NARA archival units. This is a phased rollout. We have 7 business units right now using the system. Probably in about 2 or 3 months, we'll roll out to another set of units, and then by the end of FY 2019, we'll have all NARA archival units that deal with electronic records and digital materials using this system. Just to give you an idea, one of the things that we really focused on was a low barrier to entry in terms of uploading materials into the system. Just in the first couple of weeks, probably our most active unit right now, the still pictures unit, just in the first 2 weeks, they uploaded a quarter of what they've uploaded in the last 10 years. So clearly, we've been able to kind of remove some of the barriers to getting records into the system, and they've processed some of those already and moved them over into our digital repository. I think just 2 weeks in, we had several terabytes already in, hundreds of thousands of files have already been moved up through, reviewed, processed, and all of that. So really good progress there. Last piece, so we do have that upload feature. That is going to be rolled out, and we have this unfortunate acronym BOM, which is Business Object Management, which is kind of a archaic acronym that we inherited from ERA-based, but that's really the scheduling and transfer piece of ERA. So when we say Business Object Management, which we hope to remove from the lexicon going forward, that will be rolled out when we rolled out the scheduling and transfer piece, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So just to kind of illustrate the transition here, so on the very far left, that's the ERA-based system rolled out in 2008. You can kind of break that up into 3 major capabilities: processing and verification capabilities for records, and then safe storage and retrieval of those records. And then for what is most relevant to the folks here in the room is the business object management, or the scheduling and transfer forms and workflows that you use. Where we are now, the first 2 pieces have been kind of refactored, redesigned, rebuilt into what we call the digital processing environment and the digital repository, which we just launched. ERA-based is still chugging along with the scheduling and transfer piece. Future state is obviously to redo that piece for scheduling and transfer and put that into ERA 2.0 as well. So we have that kind of one place where all of that work is done going forward. We're actually just kicked off, just as we launched ERA 2.0, basically the same week we started this new project to tackle the transfer and scheduling piece in September. So we are planning to use the same approach that we used over the past 3 or 4 years to do the ERA 2.0 work to date. So that's to use kind of an iterative, agile approach that involves frequent user interaction, lots of demos. We also have a pilot environment that we dump code into every so often to allow our users to pound on the system to give feedback. That drives our requirements going forward. We found that to be a very effective way to garner feedback from our users and to not get off course or to change course if we are off course. So we plan to continue doing that. The first part that we're just started this week is the analysis of kind of the high-level system requirements. We're doing it, as I said, in the Agile form. We have user stories that are written from the standpoint of users. And we're starting to make sure we have all of those and then starting to decompose those with our new vendor. We're also incorporating, as we go along, all the things that we've heard from users within NARA, users in the federal agencies, right? We've met with, we had 2 sessions early this year to go over all of the, to kind of elicit feedback from you about your experience with ERA base over the years, improvements you'd like to see. There were some new things that came out of that, but there was a lot of validation of things that we've heard for several years, right? So we've got a large set of things that we want to incorporate as we go along in building the new functionality. The process improvements that came out of the business process reengineering that Sam McClure talked about back in June. And I said the feedback from agencies. Pretty soon, we will start to pull in some of our NARA subject matter experts in scheduling and transfer and start to work intensively with the contractors to decompose those requirements. And then as we start building code, we'll be doing demonstrations every 2-4 weeks of what's been built to make sure that we're on the right track and to start with very generic things first and then start to lay on. Our whole idea is if you use the system now, you know that it's a very rigid system, rigid workflows, and that manifests itself in many pain points that we've heard. So those are the kinds of things we want to ferret out early, but we want to start flexible and then start to lay on rules that are absolutely necessary going forward and not try to box ourselves in as we have done at some point with ERA base in some cases. And then, still under discussion, we have to work out the actual mechanics of this is bringing all of our federal agency stakeholders who use the system, still working on exactly how to set that up. Is it going to be demos? Can we actually have some representatives who really want to dig into this to actually play around with the system in a pilot environment, that kind of thing. But I know the Archivist of the United States has been adamant to our team about making sure that we get agency feedback along the way as we build this system. So there'll be more to come on that. So just to kind of highlight some of the high-level things that we are emphasizing going forward. Redesigning the user access. We know user access is the gift that keeps on giving with ERA base. So with notifications, they're kind of based on roles and not actual users. So users get way too many notifications that are not relevant to them. So we're redesigning the whole user access framework to allow us to alleviate some of those issues. The workflow support for scheduling and transfer, we really want to work on making sure that we give better visibility to everyone involved in the process about where their schedule, where their transfer request is in the process. We don't want it to, once that work is done, to submit it to NARA. We don't want that to go in a black hole. We want to have visibility on where it is in the process at all times. Those kinds of things, they're kind of common sense, really, but we don't have those now. I would just say with the forms and the workflows, just the overall usability is something that we're going to be focusing on as well. Making them more flexible, Things like, and we've heard from federal agency folks like you who've said that a lot of cases, you advance something to the next step and you realize you forgot something or wanted to change something. Instead of having to go and track down the person that now has it, just be able to pull it back, those kinds of things. Not have as many versions, but maybe track changes to those objects as they move through their life cycle. Simplify things is kind of the overall point of this. And we'll be reevaluating all of the fields on the forms. And I know folks have already given us feedback about what data elements they would like to remain, those to change, those that we can probably remove or maybe not make required, all of those kinds of things. And making this a little bit more intelligent for things like superseding items, to have, to build functionality in the system so that when you actually supersede a previous item, that kind of turns off that item essentially, right? So to have this work a little better in that area. And then for NARA's point of view, certainly we want to capture this data in a better way so that we can carry that through the life cycle once it actually comes to NARA. And something that I think will be important and that we've heard a lot about is essentially virtual dossiers for each of the schedules and the transfer requests. And so the ability for you to upload and actually view, because I know you can't do that now, but to view attachments that are associated documentation to, say, a record schedule or a transfer request, and maybe even do things like say that this is maybe just for our agency's eyes only, that kind of thing, to be able to type the kind of attachment you're putting on there and maybe control access to it. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. So next steps. So as I said, we're just at the very beginning stages of working with our new vendor to kind of get them up to speed. They are new, so some of this is all new to them. So we spent a lot of time actually this week in long sessions just talking through the scheduling and transfer process in general to get them up to speed. And then we'll start to drill down in the iterative requirements work. Development will probably start in the January, February timeframe. So there'll be more to come next year about agency involvement, maybe kind of doing some demos, those kinds of things to get some feedback. As I've said, there's a lot to discuss about how it's best to structure that to get feedback. And then I think you'll be lucky enough to have Sam come back at some point to detail the approach as we move along. So I know there was a lot there. Let me see if I forgot anything. But, any questions at this point?
David, I have one. Can we still use ERA to schedule and transfer while you're working on the upgrades?
Yes, so there is a transition plan. So ERA base will still be the place where you schedule and transfer records. Actually, NARA now has the option, if you transfer records to us on physical media, our custodial units will actually be able to upload it into ERA 2.0. The paperwork, as it were, will still be done in ERA base. There'll be a lot of communication. So just to give you a timeline, so we're talking, I'd say maybe in the summer timeframe of 2020 is when we expect about this project to end and to roll out the new scheduling and transfer features. Don't write that down, but that's kind of my guess at this point. So before we get to that point, there's a large training effort, a large communications effort that will have to go on about this switchover and how we work that. So we'll probably have our folks getting in early before that time, putting in, we have to migrate the legacy schedules, migrate the scheduled data that's already in the system, the transfer request data and accessioning data that's already in the system to prepare for that switchover. So whether it'll be a phased switchover or not, if you recall back when we rolled out ERA, first time we started with, I think, 4 pilot agencies. We expanded to, I think, 16 and then opened up to, whether we're going to do that exactly this time, we're not sure, but it may be something like that in a phased approach. Again, we may have some opportunities to obviate the need for that by getting in maybe some pilot agencies who want to try it out kind of before we get to that point. That's been a great thing from our side with our users, because when we went to launch 3 weeks ago, we already had a cadre of users who knew the system already. They didn't even need to be trained at that point because they've been in it for the past 3 years. So we kind of hope to take that as much as possible forward. That was a long-winded answer to that question. But.
Hi. Hi, sorry, yeah, hopefully it's a quick question. Tim Schenkel. I have a question about the transfer of metadata. I know there's e-discovery tools out in the industry that use the EDRM reference model. Mm-hmm. Are you doing your own proprietary transfer schemas, or have you looked at the EDRM as a possibility?
So I would say the work to develop kind of a transfer metadata, are you talking about that may facilitate automated kind of?
Correct, yeah. So if you did a discovery and you wanted to share that with a third party, you'd use the EDRM model.
Yeah, so I would say that's still kind of a nascent area, and there are multiple parts of NARA that are kind of looking at that. We will be following that work and then trying to, take whatever comes out of that and then put that into the system to allow for that. Along those lines, so as we first go, that we have this upload feature where it's different than the way Airbase is done. It's just we're asking for a very minimum amount of metadata at that upload stage. This is kind of what I'm uploading, and you'll have to put in a transfer request that's been approved in there, and then start your upload. But there will be we want to get to the point where we can have a standard package format that if you have your objects, your records in a certain format, compliant format with a metadata package that's compliant, that we could take that in automatically. I'll also mention we're starting to do work to prepare our system to be able to receive record transfers from another cloud bucket. So we are in the cloud already, and the first step is planning to be able to receive transfers that use things like the Amazon Web Services Snowball service, which is a storage device that you rent from AWS up to 80 terabytes. You rent it, you load it with as much data as possible, and that gets sent to AWS, and they upload it up into a bucket in our environment that we then ingest those records into our system. A way to move large amounts of data, because as I'm sure you're all aware, bandwidth at federal agencies can be challenging in uploading. We've been surprised at how well it's worked in the past few weeks, especially before 8 in the morning. It's very fast. But the idea is that that's not going to work for larger amounts of data. So things like using the Snowball technology to move large amounts of data, that sets us up for where we really would like to be, which is cloud-to-cloud transfers. So we're in AWS GovCloud. If your agency happens to have records in AWS GovCloud too, there are great efficiencies to be gained in transfer when we get to that point. It's a little far off now, but we are actively working to set the stage for that.
Hey, David, can you briefly explain what BOM stands for again?
Yeah, we really have to get rid of this. So it's the piece of Airbase called Business Object Management. So in our parlance, business objects are record schedules, transfer requests. And so it's that part of the system that manages it. We've tried to kill that acronym, but it keeps creeping back. But for you, it's scheduling and transfer. And we'll try to purge that from any subsequent presentations. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Moving right along, I'm going to bring up Matt Itzen, who is the supervisor of the Permanent Records Capture Team within the Office of the Chief Records Officer, to give us an update on the annual move.
Good morning. Speaking of the ERA business object for transfer, this is a good transition. I'm here to talk about the annual move. Matt Itzen, Supervisor, Permanent Records Capture Team. I brought with me today Derek Kennedy, who is sitting up front with me. He's the National Coordinator for the annual move. Okay, so the annual move, we are both here today to encourage you to log into ERA and sign off on your transfer request that we have loaded on October the 1st. This deadline is going to be on December the 1st. The annual move is the legal transfer. It's the process at NARA for legally transferring federal records from the record centers to NARA's archival units across the nation. It's cross-functional activity within NARA, and it supports our core mission to preserve the federal records, and it's overseen by the annual move coordinating group. This year, it's just for the records that are eligible in 2019, and it's for the users of federal record centers. So this slide's really hard to read with the type, but it's to tell you that work on the annual move begins a year and a half before the actual move. So we began in November of 2017, but for you guys, really, it's July. July, you received a candidate list of the eligible transfers from the record centers, and that was for your review and to prepare internally. On October the 1st, we loaded all of those transfers into ERA, and so they're available for you now. So we're in that time frame where October to December the 1st, agencies should be going in to submit their transfers for approval. So if you are able to submit your TRs for approval, so we call it proposed, you're proposing your TRs to NARA, then the archival custodial units will give an approval decision by January the 15th. So they're going to give you an approval decision by that point. And then after that point, we will move records from the 15th to the 1st of April. So for 2019, all of those transfers that are eligible will be moving in spring of 2019. So here's the breakout of what we loaded. We have 6,688 transfers with 68,000 cubic feet that are eligible, records that cover 152 agencies. And I'm really happy to report that as of yesterday evening, we have had about 1,500 transfers that have been acted upon. So that's really good news for the month of October. Generally during this month, we have only a few hundred, and now we're up to 1,500. So that's really great news. And I did want to come up here and thank everybody who for the work that has been done and the work you will do to help to get these records into the National Archives holdings. Unfortunately, a great many of those are still in submitted for agency approval status. So in a moment, I'll get to the two different roles that are within ERA that you'll want to look at to move those along. So this is the list of the agencies with the most work that needs to be done. You can see, it ranges in the hundreds. So I think it's the same list every year, but all right, so steps to getting your TR proposed. You want to do an advanced search using the terminology 2019 annual move. The note is not to rely on the system notifications to tell you that you have transfers to sign. So one of the first things you do after you've updated your login is to find your TRs. And then when you do find your TRs, you're going to want to review them and make any changes. And here's a note that we often get questions about. You cannot change the disposition authority. That's one field that's hard and stuck. If you find out that your transfer needs a different disposition authority, give us a contact. We will walk you through the process. We'll have to start over, draft a new TR, but we can work with that. Okay, here's the confusing part, and it's just a matter of the roles. There are two roles in the transfer business object. The two roles are transferring official and agency approving official. So every TR that's in draft status needs to have those 2 roles submitted. You have to submit that twice, in those 2 roles. So some agencies have dual roles. They have both transferring official and agency approving official. In those cases, you're going to want to hit submit twice in order to get your transfer fully proposed. And going back to the number that I mentioned, about 1,200 of our TRs are in that status right now. It's at the first status where the transferring official needs to hit submit over to the agency approving official. But sometimes, if you're an agency, you might have both roles. You just need to hit submit twice. That's what you need to know. So that's what needs to be done. I think I explained if you have a single role, those should be. And then, the best piece of guidance and the thing that we use the most is the ERA user manual. So pages 48 through 53 are going to be the screenshots you need, how do you do the advanced search to find your TRs, and then once you get there, what screens do you need to hit submit on. So that's a lot in a few minutes, but the user guide is right here on the records management website on ERA. Of course, you can remember annual.move@nara.gov, and we were pretty responsive during this time period. Expectations, you might get an email reminder from us in the November, slightly before Thanksgiving, again, reminding you. And then you could get a phone call, too, because we want to reach out, and we look at our transfer statuses on a daily basis leading up to December the 1st. So if I have any questions, I'll answer them now. Great.
Thanks, Matt. You must have done a perfect job, completely clear. Everybody knows what to do, right? Right? So if you work with the FRCP to store records, this is the moment that you've been waiting for. Have the pleasure of bringing up Jeff Lunsford, who's Chief Financial Analyst for the FRCP, who is going to talk to you about 2020 rates.
Good morning. I will try to limit my remarks. I know we're already past 11:30, and I don't want to squeeze your break too much before the 1 o'clock. I'm Jeff Lunsford. I'm the Chief Financial Analyst for the Record Center program, here to talk to you about the 2020 rates, sort of. So this is some exciting news. First, a little bit of background. When Congress established the Record Center program as a revolving fund, as a reimbursable authority in the year 2000, they put on some business constraints that really shape the rates that we do. They shape a lot of management decisions and sort of the way we deliver services, but the rates specifically, because I do the rates, I wanted to talk about that. So Congress authorized us to collect fees for the services that we deliver, as long as we cover the entire cost of those services. So we have to cover salaries, equipment, rent, as well as overhead. And that's not an inconsequential piece of our expenses. I think we pay about 30% to NARA administrative offices for their overhead services. Congress also declared that we are only able to service federal agencies and instrumentalities of the federal government. We recognize that agencies do have the opportunity and option to go to the private sector for record storage and services. So we consider ourselves in a competition of sorts. I think we have a slightly different value proposition than the private sector does, but we really do take the pricing that we promulgate seriously in terms of that kind of competition, in terms of an open marketplace. So the other big deal is that Congress told us that we are able to retain 4% of our revenue in excess of our expenses. In other words, if we spend $100 million delivering storage and services to federal agencies, and we charge $104 million, then we can keep that $4 million as long as we reinvest it into the program. So buying furniture for Suitland, or building ARCIS or CMRS or standing up new facilities and buying shelving. All of those sort of capital expenses get funded through that 4% excess. I wanted to take a minute before we get into 19 and 20 to talk about our experience with FY18. We're still in the process of closing out the books, but I would argue that 2018 was our most successful financial year as a program in the entire life of the revolving fund. And that's because I should say, the initial draft of our final financial reports showed that our expenses were within 0.07% of our revenue. In other words, we were an at-cost operation for 2018. I like to think that that's because the rates were well done in 2018, that we did not charge you any more than it cost us to deliver the services. That's fantastic success. Not that we couldn't have used a little bit of extra money to buy some furniture for Suitland, but we'll figure that out. We got that. So the question is, why are we talking about 2020? I mean, 2019 just started. And that really gets back to feedback that we received from all of you, I hope, about through the venue of the annual customer survey. We take those results seriously. We look at them. And one of the pain points that you guys have reported is the process of the interagency agreements. And there's some specifics about sort of the timing of all that kind of stuff. We made some changes last year and again this year in terms of getting the packages to you earlier, getting the rates to you earlier, and trying to streamline that process to the extent that we can. You know, it's still sort of a government acquisition, so I can't say it's ever going to be painless, but we really do want to make that as easy as possible. We want to be accessible to you. So last year, when I announced the FY 2018 rates, I was also able to announce the last year I announced the 2018 rates as well as the 2019 rates. So we were able to provide 2 years worth of rates at the same time. So this year, instead of working on the 2019 rates, which are already done, I spent the summer developing the 2020 rates. And that's a process that is quite complicated, takes many, many months. I actually do a data call to each of our 18 record center directors and ask them about the projected workload, their projected operating expenses, any changes that they see in any of those. I collect all this data and I create a spreadsheet that's 20,000 rows long and maybe 27 columns wide. And then I start doing pivot tables that sort of adds 15 or 20 tabs to a spreadsheet. And it's more than a house of cards. I mean, it's actually a rigorous analysis, but it is a very complicated process. So I spent the summer looking at the 2020 rates, and we are in the process of getting them approved. So I can't say much about them. We have submitted the package to the CFO's office, and just sort of with the timing of the end of the fiscal year and the fiscal year closeout, we have yet to meet to talk about sort of our vision for what the rates do, how it sort of strategically places us in 2020 for the future and that sort of thing. I can say with certainty that the rates should not affect any customer sort of outside the range of an inflationary increase. So there's not going to be sort of a 10% increase in your bill or anything like that. But we do understand the value of getting those 2020 rates not only to you, so that we can begin sort of crafting the 2020 interagency agreements, at least make that process smoother when it comes around in the summer, but also getting those rates to your budget officers. They're already thinking about 2020, 2021 to some degree. So that key piece of information is going to be useful to them as well. So that's all I have to say about 2020. I'm sorry, no news is maybe not great news, but keep an eye out for them. They will be available hopefully sometime very soon. Are there any questions?
Good morning, Jeff. I'm Tom Lee from the Air Force. We all know about the deadline of December 31st, 2022, and NARA no longer accepting any hard copy records, including its federal records centers. Would we expect to see a dramatic adjustment in terms of the rates for the years afterwards, given that there's now going to be a fixed volume and a declining volume of hard copy records at the FRCs? Thank you.
So the Record Center Program Management Team obviously thinks about that issue very, very seriously. Excuse me. We're doing an off-site summit to do some visioning and strategic planning about what the Record Center program is going to look like, not just on January 1st, 2023, but in the years and decades beyond that. We do not anticipate significantly different rates in the future than we have in the past in terms of like sort of annual increases. The change in policy with regard to accepting paper-based transfers may have an impact on the buildings that we occupy, the facilities that we have, and certainly we project that the overall holdings will go down fairly dramatically over time. So we will have to be nimble in terms of our response to that, not only from an administrative and logistics response, but also financially. There are some projections that we've done that suggest that our expenses may be dramatically lower. I can't say that with certainty here because we have a lot of different models. But if the rates do change, it may not be that the rates are going to skyrocket. It may be that we'll be able to keep them stable or perhaps even reduce some of the rates. So to be determined. It's a fantastic question. We spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Hey, Jeff, can you briefly say what services are included in the interagency agreements?
Sure. Interagency agreements actually cover the vast majority of what we do. We have standard national rates for storage. If you store a box in Riverside, it costs you the same as if you store a box in Pittsfield. The terms and conditions for the interagency agreements also include the basic transfer and disposition, interfiles, refiles, reference. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple of them. We do have rates for sort of shipping and handling. We do have labor rates for sort of non-standard services where we can craft special projects using hourly rates. And then there's some services that we do that are not necessarily codified because, and I'm thinking of scanning. I mean, we do have a couple scanning rates on there, but projects for scanning tend to be a bit more complicated. So we'll have, scanning a certain volume of records, and then we'll add some labor rates on top of that, and then we may have to do sort of a miscellaneous C1 charge is what it's called. But generally, the rates cover all of our standard services. Anything else? Great. Good to see you again. Thanks for your time.
So we're coming up to 12, but I think we have time to squeeze in one more presentation in this marathon session of Bridge. So I am going to introduce Preston Huff, who is with our Records Management Policy and Outreach Program to talk about a new product we just released not too long ago, the Essential Records Guide.
All right, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm sure they'll tell me in the AV unit whether you cannot hear me or not. Jim, move to the next slide, please. The one on the work group effort, if you would. We'll start there. So a couple of months ago, a NARA work group of 10 staff members completed a project to update what was then called the Vital Records Guide. You're probably familiar with that, and that was created back in 1996. So that's been now 22 years ago. And that publication had not changed since it was posted back then, so you can imagine it was kind of getting a little bit out of date. I was the lead on the project, and the Vital Records Guide back then was just available on our website. And the new Essential Records Guide, as we call it, is also just available online. There is no physical copy of that. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the task of the work group. The main task was to correct some of the errors that had crept in over the years. It was a very good publication. It was kind of a definitive resource on essential records in the federal government. But in that many years, some things began to kind of get out of whack. Things like outdated organization names and the various positions that had responsibilities. Those references had begun to be outdated, and sometimes they even disappeared. So obviously that needed to be fixed. Also, we needed to update our terminology, and one of the primary examples of that is the actual term vital. And that term was the term of art back in 1996, but in the federal government that has changed now to essential. Some of you are aware of that, some of you may not be. So the change started with the various state and local archives, and it came up because of confusion by them of the term vital, which has a different meaning in state and local government. And that is that it generally implies, and there's a whole list of types of records, but basically the main ones are birth and death records. That's what they call vital, and the rest are essential. So shortly after Hurricane Katrina, and they were involved with FEMA quite a bit, they began to lobby FEMA to start using the term essential. And FEMA did that, and they made that change about 10 years ago. And then we at NARA, we were not quite as quick to make that change. We kind of stuck with the term vital, but now we too have adopted the term because it's kind of getting confusing. FEMA was calling it essential, we were still calling it vital. So with the new Essential Records Guide, that shows that we are accepting that new term as well for the federal government. Private sector, you may still see vital records being mentioned out there, but for the federal government, we are all trying to go to essential. And the regulation, which is 36 CFR 1223, is still called vital records, but it will likely change later. All right, in the next slide, the work group task was to make some additional changes, such as to begin to use more recent examples of disasters. The 1996 guide was kind of stuck in the references were for the 1970s, 1980s, early 1990s. So we've had a lot that has happened over the past 22 years as far as disasters and events. Disasters such as 9/11, the terrorist attack in 2001, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and then the devastating hurricane season that we all experienced this last year, Hurricane Harvey in Texas, and Hurricanes Irma and Maria in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and Florida. And then we've had other disasters and events as well. So we wanted also, in addition to using just more recent examples, we also wanted to incorporate more on electronic records. The old 1996 guide, good as it was largely about paper and microfilm, or analog records. And the old term that they use for what we call electronic records was machine-readable records. So we wanted to update the references on that and put more in there about electronic information, electronic records, and digital records. We wanted more on FEMA content. FEMA's been doing an awful lot in the last 20-some years as far as guidance on not only just continuity and risk management, but they also have some information on essential records as well. So there's a bit of a crossover with FEMA. So we wanted to incorporate more FEMA content and guidance in our guide, and we have done so. And we built in also more photos and charts and illustrations. So it's all not just about narrative. We thought it'd be a lot more interesting to have some visuals in it as well. Next slide, please. All right, so in regards to other changes, probably one of the best improvements I think that we made to the new guide is that we included lots of links to any of the referenced regulations, executive orders, international standards, any applicable websites. It wasn't just enough to mention it, but we thought we ought to provide a link so you could just click on that link and you go right to the source document. So you don't have to get out of the document and do a Google search and try to find it, and that can be kind of frustrating. So the new guide is full of links. Of course, the onus is on us to make sure that we maintain it, but we think it's a lot more useful as a tool for you. We also updated the appendices, the glossaries, any references to position roles and responsibilities. Those have all been brought up to modern times. Also, we used a designer to make the public-facing guide more attractive and functional, and we incorporated the use of color in it as well. So we just think it's visually more appealing. One of the other good things is obviously downsizing it. 90 pages, that was a pretty good size publication back in 1996. And so now the new one is been downsized to 53 pages. All right, next slide. This is the one that says before and after. On the left-hand side, you see the 1996 version. This is what it would look like if you printed it out. And I would not recommend it at 90 pages, and it takes quite a while to print that thing. But that's what it would look like, pretty much black ink on white background. And then on the right-hand side is the new Essential Records Guide. And you see the edition date, August of 2018. That is the latest and greatest date on this. And it looks a bit more polished and attractive, at least we think, than our usual guidance type documents. Next slide, please. All right, so on this one, you should be looking at the Essential Records Guide with a couple of the pages kind of pulled out. And what we're trying to do here is to show the use of the photos that we put in there, the color, and really we think it's just a more efficient layout for this guide. It's easier to find information, we think. The photos complement the narrative, and they make the content a bit more interesting and relevant. So much more attractive. Next slide, please. All right, the guide is now posted online. It was posted to the NARA website back in September. And it's it's only available electronically. And by the way, FEMA will soon be linking to it as well from their website. They have not done yet. They've been very involved with hurricane activity here lately, and they've informed me that they will be doing it soon. So you'll be able to reach it from either the FEMA site or from NARA's site. And it's the same Essential Records, so they have the same look. And at the same time, as we did the new Essential Records Guide, We also launched a new Essential Records Information web page, or a landing page. Next slide, please. And I don't want to steal Jim's thunder, whether it's going to be this afternoon or whether it's going to be at the next BRIDG meeting. I suspect it'll be the next BRIDG meeting. But just to kind of give you a heads up, this is the new records management web page. And you get there by selecting, when you go to the NARA homepage, the main page, there's kind of down on the left-hand side, there's the Records Managers tab or topic that you're familiar with. You select that, and that's how you would get to this web page. So you note in the important topics, generally where that arrow is pointing, that's where you have links to various types of information. And one piece of information there, well, one link, is the Essential Records and Disaster Recovery. You click on that, and that would launch this new landing page. And here you see at the new landing page the Essential Records information. And it has tons of information there. So in that first paragraph, you have a link to 36 CFR 1223. That is the regulation for essential records in the federal government. Then you have 6 buttons there that are selectable. And the first one in the upper left-hand corner is the Essential Records Guide itself. That's where the star is placed. And the star is just here, of course, for illustration. It's not on your landing page. But it's just to show you that that's where you would get to that information. And again, it has all kinds of links. It has all kinds of information. So that's really going to be a very good portal for anything to do with essential records. But we wanted to include a little bit more information there, too. So on the upper right-hand button, the NARA Points of Contact, you have, you select that, you're going to get to the NARA Appraisal Archivist, NARA Conservators, ISOO. Mark was talking about ISOO earlier. So that would get to his staff so that you would be able to get information on CUI or controlled unclassified information and classified information. Then in the middle, you have the 2 buttons on emergency disposal of contaminated records and unauthorized disposal reporting. It's not unique to essential records. That's all records. But in many cases, it will involve essential records, and we thought it would be good to have links to those pages where you could get more information on those 2 types of destruction of records. And in the lower left-hand corner, there's some information that is very important to agencies, and that is think of it in terms of a clearinghouse for information vendors that specialize in records recovery services. We're not endorsing any particular vendor, but you select that and you'll have access to all the vendors that we know about that are doing business in records recovery, including electronic records, I might add. So a very useful source to have. It's all compiled. It's in one location. The lower right-hand corner, that's a nod to FEMA. That is FEMA's Federal Continuity Directive number 1, NXF, Essential Records Management Information. And that's January 2017, so it's very up-to-date information. So from this new landing page, it should be easier to get to the information that you need regarding protecting your essential records and recovering from a disaster if that be the case. Next slide, please. All right, so for more information on the project and pulling this all together, and then how to get to the Essential Records Guide, and again, going back over some of the justification for why we thought that that was necessary to do, and then information about the new landing page or web page, we suggest that you check out the 3 recent Records Express blog posts, and it contains information on all of this. And two of the recent blog posts were about two recent disasters, Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael. And just incidentally, it had links to the brand new posted guide and web page so that we could share that with agencies. And then the post on September the 14th was specific to the project and the launch of the new guide and the new website, without talking about those two other disasters. And then the last thing on that page there is the AC memo in FY 2018. That was AC 31-2018. That's specifically in regard to the new guide. And so I think these are good sources. It's a good place to start by going to the Records Express blog to find the recent information. It's very, very recent, obviously. And we'll give you some more information beyond what I'm talking about today.
Thank you, Preston. So we are out of time today, and I know I'm sure there are stomachs growling out in the audience, and we have to be back here at 1 o'clock for those of you who work with Appraisal Team 3. So if you have any questions about the guide for Preston, or you want to send us your feedback on what you think of the guide, please let us know to that address, PRMD, and we'll make sure we get your questions answered and review your thoughts on the guide itself. So our next meeting in December will be on the 12th, same place, same time, same networking in the morning, same meet and greet in the afternoon. And we are looking forward to seeing those of you who work with Appraisal Team 3 back up in the Washington room on the mezzanine level at 1 o'clock. Thank you all for coming.